thing. And my mother goes, really? You're not going to buy her anything? In the world's most famous toy store, you're not going to buy her anything? So we're sitting there and they have demos and this, that, and the other. And my mother goes, look, it's only $16. Get it, just buy it for her. So I thought, my mom's real good at spending other people's money.
Right.
Right. And with having 3 kids, I can't just go, okay, I'll buy one. So of course I have to buy 3. And suddenly that I thought was
the triple threat.
a reasonable amount. I had said to my wife, look, I was really good. I did not spend $1,000, spent $100 on our kids. But it was just that experience of being in New York that I think really impressed her. That and also the snowstorm that hit New York.
Yes.
My daughter was very impressed with that white falling snow that
she wasn't aware of.
She had said, I don't want to go back to Florida.
Can I ask you a question though?
Mm-hmm.
16 times 3 is not 100. So how did you spend $100? You bought more stuff.
I bought more stuff.
You bought more stuff. There was more to the story that you weren't.
Well, I had said to my daughter, because she has one of those Build-A-Bear, right? The Build-A-Bear stuff. And she said, can I get an outfit? So I said, sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So she gets an outfit. And I said, well, I got to get one for my middle child. So I said, fine, pick an outfit for Maya. Then when it got to the end, they had these outfits of the Statue of Liberty. And I thought to myself, okay, that's on me. So of course I buy 3 of them. And my wife goes, wow, what an amazing thing. I said, I don't want them fighting. So I bought 3 of these Statue of Liberty bear doll clothing.
Yeah.
Which now, I mean, it's only been about 4 days, but I think we're lucky if we can still find one.
Good. Well, it'll turn up at some point.
It will.
Well, I flew in 3 of my wife's friends from New York City. Some of them are out in Jersey, actually, so technically, but for her, to surprise her for her birthday. So they came in, and then while they were there, I got this vlog that I do. Your Favorite Christian. It's a vlog on YouTube. Check it out. Follow the weekly adventures of a wacky priest. And so I said, well, you ladies, you're here. We got to use you. So we threw them into the vlog, and the whole vlog is about what do women really want in a man. And so hearing these 3 New York, New Jersey girls talk about what they really want in a man was pure entertainment. So it was good stuff. So if you guys want to check out that one over on Your Favorite Christian, that's over on YouTube. All right, enough of this silliness. And let's get into something that's a truly pressing matter, and I think one that's awakened us all. It is something that has been always here in the undercurrent, always here, just flowing through like an invisible plague, but it's now visible, and that is our eyes have been opened to just a piece, just a smidgen of human trafficking here, right here in Martin County, and of course it's affected in the news. We've seen the shutdown of up to, I think we're looking at maybe 7 to 9. If we got 3 of these massage parlors, 3 in Indian River, 4 in Martin County, and 2 in Jupiter. So, Rabbi, I know your math sometimes is a little weird. So that would bring us to about 9. 9 parlors have been shut down that seemingly, ostensibly, were offering massages, and maybe they were offering legitimate stuff in the front, but in the back room, it gets a little weird. And then now finding out that it was connected to a whole international sex trafficking ring. So we the topic, and it was on the headlines for a lot of papers, and then the conversations have begun to dim down. And this is just a plague that we have to deal with, and it's been in front of us for since the dawn of time of human trafficking. But we wanted to bring on someone who knows extremely, who is an expert in this information, or going further into this. But as Roberta Katz onto the show, she is the chair of the Human Trafficking Coalition for the Treasure Coast in Okeechobee. So first, Roberta, welcome to the show, and thank you for coming and to hang out with us on this Friday morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me, because I do think it is a huge topic. So I was very excited to learn that the 2 of you were interested in having someone and tackling it out on this bright Friday morning.
Yeah. So let's start right from the beginning. We as Martin Countians have been hearing the word sex trafficking a lot because of the closure of the parlors just in Martin County. But it's sex trafficking is an aspect of human trafficking.
Correct.
So let's start there. How do we define trafficking?
So human trafficking has 2 types. There's sex trafficking and there's labor trafficking. And labor trafficking, if you want the official national definition. The federal definition is recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery.
Okay. All right. And so then sex trafficking would be defined as?
Very similar, the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for commercial sex act, or in which the person induced to perform such an act is under 18 years of age. When a minor is trafficked for a commercial sex act, there's no need to prove force, fraud, or coercion.
Okay.
But interesting definition in terms of we're talking about, those below the age.
Yes.
Right. So we're talking about minors. What about if you are over the age?
They have to prove force, fraud, or coercion, but it's still the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for a commercial sex act.
Okay.
There's an or in there.
And I would assume that if one is 18 and above, that there is is the line. Are there gray zones between that definition of one that is 18 and older and, say, prostitution or the solicitation of prostitution? I don't know if I'm being clear.
I don't know that you are being clear.
So in terms of being trafficked as an adult, as opposed to just providing goods and services for the purposes of sexual services.
Right. So it's really a hard question. And criminal law has defined prostitution different from human trafficking. Mm-hmm. The question I have to say is, if you are going to try and convince me that someone over the 18 is engaging in prostitution versus human trafficking, and you tell me that that person engaged in it because she felt she had no other choice and no other way to feed her children, mm-hmm. is it really a choice she's making? And when I do educate, I do have a lot of people say, if I go with your definition of human trafficking, it would seem like there's no crime anymore of prostitution. And my answer is, okay, I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with that. I can see why the layperson would try and differentiate mm-hmm. that, or maybe not even the layperson, maybe the Johns or the pimps who don't want to be caught in human trafficking mm-hmm. because it is a bigger crime, mm-hmm. want to differentiate that. But I think you can also make an argument that prostitution is no longer a crime that we should be looking at in and of itself. It's human trafficking.
Right. And I can hear the pushback from that, just because if you make a conscious decision and to say, I've reached a place in my life where, or for whatever reason, the reason behind where I need to provide, and I need to then turn to the oldest profession in the world, and as many call it, prostitution, either to feed my children or for whatever the reason is. And whether you do that as a solo journey or as if there is a pimp involved, that it's your conscious decision and you're making that conscious decision to do it. Because I bring this up because this is with some of the pushback on some of these parlors, right? That some of these women, it was two consenting adults who made the decision to say, okay, I'm here, I'm going to give a massage, I'm going to offer you an extra service, or if you get if you're in Las Vegas and you pick up the yellow pages and you call one of those phone numbers and they show up at your hotel room, then that there's money put down, and then the woman says, or the man would say, however much more money you put down, the further we go. So you have these two consenting adults saying, let's do this. Mm-hmm.
But the question is are they consenting if one of them doesn't feel like they have a choice? Because even though it appears like the one person is accepting money, are they really accepting the money? Is that their money? Is it being paid to somebody else? And in the instance we have with the massage parlors, they were actually living in the massage parlors. These are people that were, and that's one of the signs that we tell everyone to look for, is the person not able to leave. Do they work and live and do everything in one spot because they're not free to move about? And maybe they have some freedoms where they can run to Publix, or the food store, or, eat at one of your sponsors. But they really aren't free. That's where they're living. They don't have their papers. They don't have their documentation. So that's the difference between that scenario and, for instance, the one you're proposing in Las Vegas,
right.
And more of a traditional prostitution definition. So those are some elements of human trafficking that we need to educate the public on. And that's what came to the attention in our specific county of, I think it was a health inspector went in there, and that's why she was, things didn't look right. And that's my biggest thing when I educate. If something doesn't look right, say something. You don't have to go investigate. I mean, I'd love it if the two of you want to go out and rescue people. I'm not saying that. However, you may not be comfortable doing that. So if you see something that doesn't make sense and you see one of those red flags, just alert somebody, alert law enforcement, alert the hotline, alert somebody who can go out there and take a look, because things do not add up. When things don't add up, there's something more there. And that's what was going on here.
Right. And so I just want to rewind a little bit. The Human Trafficking Coalition, and that's one of the main things that you all do, right? Is education?
Absolutely. We have actually two parts right now, because we are in a building phase. We have a huge part that is education, but we do also have outreach, which is a form of education. But the outreach committee actually is going into the fields and the massage parlors and the hotels and the farms in Indiantown, and is meeting with people and talking to people and making sure that they are actually educated on what their rights are and if they need help and how they can be rescued if they need it. The education committee is educating the public, is educating children, is educating the community.
Right, because there's a lot of threats that are out there right now. So we've seen, as just the everyday Martin Countian, we've seen just a one little tentacle of human trafficking, which is the massage parlors. And from talking to you or talking to Lynn Barletta of Catch a Wave of Hope, both you would say, that is just a small little piece of what of the existence and the presence of human trafficking just right here. Not in the country, just right here.
Absolutely.
So we were on our conference call yesterday talking about some of the biggest threat or the biggest risk to just let's say with children or the young ones, teenagers, guys. The age usually is around 12. When we're talking, you were saying on average can be as early as young as 12. What is the demographic that's most at risk of falling into human trafficking, or more specifically sex trafficking, just right here in these counties, surrounding counties?
When we talk about children, I mean, there's a lot of risk factors, but the one that I mentioned to you as the number one risk factor is foster children. Foster children, and they are vulnerable children. When you read the risk factors, it's all children, ones that want, children that want attention, children that like material items, children that feel insecure, children that maybe don't have two parents, maybe children that, have low self-esteem. I mean, all these things go into it. That's every child. Every child falls in at least one of those categories, but foster children fall in usually more than one of those categories, and they are at higher risk. And we do have foster children in Martin County.
And how does it happen? Like, from the stories that you've heard, where does it happen? Does it happen the foster child gets tempted or kind of almost seduced by an outside party, or is it the foster family?
No. It's an outside party. It doesn't have to always be an adult. They're talking to someone at school. They're, I hate to say we have recruitment in schools, but we do. We have recruitment in schools by other children.
Right here in Martin County.
I don't have any documented cases in Martin County.
Okay.
But I could tell you it's nationwide. So I don't have any reason to believe Martin County is exempt from that. You have several ways. You have adults that prey on children because they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable to love, to, I'll be your daddy. I'll be your support. I'll buy you things, things like that. You have other children bringing them in basically to save themselves. I'll bring in other children to save themselves. We have stories of schools, boyfriends trafficking their girlfriends, have sex with me and I'll buy you X, Y, and Z, and have sex with my friend and we'll get you X, Y, and Z.
So there's some kind of there's an exchange that happens. It's transactional.
It can be money or goods, but it actually is just the promise of. So whether the actual item is exchanged is irrelevant. It's the promise of goods or items or the actual exchange. So there doesn't have to be. So just because there might not have been that transaction, they say, well, we just had sex because you wanted to have sex, even though maybe the victim saying, well, he promised me X, Y, and Z. He promised me, we have had foster children in the Treasure Coast come back, if they're on runaway and tell us, because we have what I call a debriefing. And we say, well, where did you sleep? Well, I found someone who said I could, crash on his couch if we had sex. And this is a 16-year-old. And that's what's out there. 2 out of 3 runaways are approached within 48 hours by a trafficker. That's what the statistics say.
Rick, can you say that one more time?
2 out of 3 runaways are approached within 48 hours by a trafficker. So I had sex with this older man because he told me he'd give me a place to stay. And I said, what did you eat? Well, he promised me a pizza if I had sex with his friend or 3 friends that he brought home. And that's how they're surviving on the street sometimes, And runaways can be foster children or not foster children, but that's the experience I had because that's my main job.
And prosecution, in terms of when this comes to light, in terms of trying to validate the authenticity of a child claiming these things that are going on in terms of the perpetrator did this and this. How easy or how difficult is it to prosecute?
It's hard. I mean, it's hard on the victim. I mean, if you don't know personally because of what you do, I mean, you see it on TV, and I believe it's true. Just in regular sex abuse cases, it's hard. It's hard on the victim. In rape cases, it's hard on the victim. They drag them through the system, and it's that much more with human trafficking. It's that and more. So it's hard from that aspect, and you have to have the victim's cooperation. I mean, you do.
That's what I was just about to ask, is that there's a whole psychological part of this.
Absolutely.
Right? Where there's a little bit of, I think a layman's term would be like brainwashing, right? Of how the whether it is a child or whether it's an adult, adult being someone over 18, that you, because of this promise of gifts given or promise of shelter or whatever it's going to be, that the trafficker, the pimp, or whoever you want to call this person, becomes sort of this mother or father figure,
absolutely,
to them, and
absolutely,
and this,
through
this
threats,
warped.
Absolutely, through threats, through violence, through gifts. I mean, it's like that cycle you hear about when you talk about domestic violence. It's a very similar cycle. The victims learn to lie. They learn not to trust people. They're being threatened. Their families are being threatened. They learn to lie about their age. They develop Stockholm syndrome.
Explain that for the viewers, the listeners, what that means.
Stockholm syndrome is where you learn to have, positive feelings towards your abuser as a defense mechanism. I mean, it was developed in that case with Patty Hearst. Hearst. I always want to say the other Patty. Patty Hearst and Elizabeth Smart. They said had Stockholm syndrome. Sean Hornbeck, if anyone knows that name, that was the child on the side of the milk carton. The missing child on the side of the milk carton. That was Stockholm syndrome. PTSD. You see that in human trafficking victims. That's PTSD is what you see in, veterans. You see it in domestic violence victims. You see it in human trafficking victims. I mean, that's hardcore.
Right.
And it all goes into the mix. These are, when you rescue victims, it's not just so easy to rescue victims. I mean, I have a list of 20 things you need minimum when you rescue victims. And some of them are tangible, like food, clothing, shelter. Some of them aren't. They need jobs. They need a support system. They need counseling. They need, to feel like they have a place to go mentally so that they don't revert back to what they know, because we see that. Even though it's such a horrible thing, they go back because that's what they know. There's medical care, there's dental care, there's all that.
And with a child, say with a minor, in terms of getting consent to investigate or to really unpack what's going on with them, because they're a minor. As an organization of the coalition and as a lawyer, do you have that ability when a minor says, yes, I will consent, that suddenly you can then proceed? Or do you have to go back to a legal guardian? Do you have to go back to the state? How does that work?
I mean, it depends on if this child has parents. Okay. It really does depend on the parents. If they have parents, then we're working with the parents. I mean, it's supposed to be very collaborative, and it has been. We try and make it a very collaborative situation. If it's a foster child situation, if they're put in foster care for various reasons, trafficked while they were in foster care, or maybe they're in foster care because they were trafficked by a parent or guardian, then the state Department of Children and Family has removed them from their home. The state is then their parent.
Okay.
But it's all comes down to counseling.
Hmm.
You know, even if it's a child, it all comes down to counseling and
the resources that are available. I mean, I assume that the coalition has trained therapists that try and help and guide the vulnerable into.
The coalition is a collaboration of all the providers, law enforcement, mental health providers, DCF, DJJ, guardian ad litem. We're just a collaborative aspect. So when I've been getting calls in the past couple of weeks and people needed something, I sent them to which provider I knew would help them. We don't actually have the providers. We're just a collaboration, make sure we're all working together. But we do have those, even in the Treasure Coast. We have had those providers, and they're not new. They're not in.
And the coalition itself, how long has the coalition been around?
We reformed in 2015.
Okay.
We reformed in 2015. I think it was around a few years before that. It had kind of fizzled out. Just so you know, the coalition was created because we were mandated to be created. It was mandated to be created. Every circuit is supposed to have a coalition to deal with this in Florida.
Interesting.
All right. So now that this recent bust has happened, have you noticed that has there been an uptake in people wanting more education, wanting more awareness, whether it's churches or civic groups or saying, hey, can you come in and please just give us some workshops on this? And or hopefully, have you seen any more of like maybe victims or tips that have has there been increase in either victims trying to reach out or more tips coming around saying, I think something strange going on at that hotel or at that massage parlor or at this house down the street?
I mean, I feel like I should object because that was a compound question because that was like 3 in 1, but we're not in court. So I'm going to start with the end because that's what I remember.
Okay.
I have heard there's been a uptick in tips. Okay. So, and those would be pending investigations. So I'm not going to say anything more about that, but I have heard that there has been a sharp rise, like the week after, like immediately there was a sharp rise on the Treasure Coast.
Just right here on the Treasure Coast.
Absolutely. I spoke to someone who told me absolutely they are now investigating a few more leads. So, yes, there has been a sharp uptick in that respect. And so I've now forgotten the rest of your question.
The other part, my learned friend would be also just as in, has there been more outreach from victims or from friends who might say, I think my friend might be in a tight situation here? Do you know if that there's also been that kind of increase? Because I know there's a hotline, right, and which is there's a human trafficking hotline that you can call.
1-888-3737-888 is the National Human Trafficking Hotline.
One more time.
888-3737-888. Now, that's the National Human Trafficking Hotline. I will tell you, in Florida, if it's a child, a minor under 18, we do recommend that before you call them, you call the Florida Child Abuse Hotline, which is 1-800-96-ABUSE. That's the DCF hotline, because they'll step in. I don't know. I haven't heard from the human trafficking hotline if there's been an increase. I could tell you from years in the past, we are always seeing an increase. I do believe that education is what it is. I mean, when we educate, we have a disclosure protocol. Every time we go talk to the schools and we say we want to come in, which on the Treasure Coast we are still open to, we say, remember, we have to have a disclosure protocol. And when we've gone into the community and spoken at places where children are, we spoke at 4-H, we've spoken at the foster homes, we've spoken at group homes in the Treasure Coast, we meet with them first and say, do you have a disclosure protocol? Which most of them do because they have a sexual abuse in general protocol. We just follow that protocol, but we check on that first because it is inevitable. Once we educate, we are going to have disclosures because it all comes back to education. And I think that's what we're seeing in the community, because I myself got 4 phone calls the first Monday after the bust in Martin County. I got 4 phone calls, 2 from churches, 1 in Vero Beach and 1 in St. Lucie, and 2 others saying, what can I do to help? What can I do? What can I do? Where do we start? What can I do? So we're even seeing the community come together, say, what do we need to do? Where can we help you? Like literally on the front lines, what do you need from me?
That's great. And who do they call when someone who's listening right now says, I want to do this. I want my church. I want my synagogue. I want my women's group to hear from you all and come and educate us. How do they get in touch with you?
They call me 772-871-7238.
Okay.
And we'll get it done.
We'll get it done. Okay, great. We're going to take a quick break, and you know, sex trafficking, unfortunately, is just one small aspect of the human trafficking world, and we'll come back to that and talk about just how broad and how big this gets, and the definition of what human trafficking is. But most importantly, we're focusing on its presence just right here in Southeast Florida. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll get more into this when we get back. All right, we are back. We are back here, and we are talking about a hot topic, an important topic, one that is a calling to us all. We believe, obviously, as a rabbi and a priest, there's a moral calling, and the rabbi and I were just sharing scripture during the break on what the Bible says, or what Hebrew scripture says, and Christian scripture as well. Obviously, 2/3 of Christian scripture is Hebrew scripture. So of how our Lord looks upon this idea of enslavement, of kidnapping. There's some pretty stern words that we cannot just turn our eyes away from this and just say, well, let the authorities do what the authorities do. There is a moral obligation, and I would say a faith obligation, a Judeo-Christian obligation that we have to this, that, you know, if you're just coming back to the show, we're focusing on human trafficking, and specifically its presence here in Southeast Florida. And we have Roberta Katz with us, who is works. She is the chair of the coalition against, my gosh, the of a human trafficking coalition for the Treasure Coast and Okeechobee. To look at my notes, there's just so much going on here. I'm just so befuddled. But in any event,
but I think even if we were to go back to, you know, let's just say the Torah, for example. I mean, the Torah is replete with tons of scriptural evidence to try and counter, you know, what's going on. You know, we have a very famous line in Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 14, that says, "You shall not abuse a needy or destitute laborer." And I think, you know, when we look at that in terms of our own understanding and our moral responsibility, I think that if we were, as you know, Father Anderson, you had said, look, if we turn our back or we turn our eyes to it, we are just as guilty. And I think, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said this, the exact same thing, not regarding human trafficking, but in terms of, few are guilty, but all are responsible. And I think, it's a powerful, powerful phrase to understand that, are we contributing to it if we see something or we feel that something is just not, we'll say in a Hebrew context, things are just not kosher, things are just not fitting, things are just not right. If we turn our eye to it and have that assumption, well, somebody else will say something, are we just as guilty?
Yeah, right. And from a Christian perspective, that the transfiguration is this time where we see where Jesus takes three of his disciples and goes up the mountain, right? Takes them up the mountain, this long walk up the mountain. And there's this glorious moment that happens, right? And I think that a lot of Christians can get this glorious moment. You receive it. You're full of this beautiful, you feel the experience of God. And then what happens next, though, is that Jesus says, now we're going to go back down the mountain, right into the plains, into the reality of this world. You can't just stay up in the clouds, stay up in our silos. And because Peter, James, and John wanted to create these little it was the feast of tents. I'm sorry, I'm saying this the wrong way. The feast of what we did at your house.
Feast of Booths.
The Feast of the Booths.
Sukkot.
Yes, Sukkot. And so it was right around that time, and Peter's like, "Hey, let's build three of those." And he's like, "No, man, we can't just bask in the glory of what it means to be a person of faith. Get down and do the work." And immediately there was a boy with epilepsy, and Jesus healed him. So we get caught up, I think, in our places of faith sometimes. And I could just speak from my own perspective, from a Christian place. We get really comfortable. We get comfortable, and sometimes our places of faith can become a self-help seminar. And yes, our faith is here to heal us, forgive us, to renew us. But then we got to go into the uncomfortable, and we got to allow ourselves to be pushed into the uncomfortable places. And my gosh, human trafficking and sex trafficking, especially when it's happening in our backyard. You don't have to take a flight to Thailand to be able to fight this fight. You can be right here and join many of the different organizations. And we have Roberta Katzworth here, who's letting us know of the signs to look for, the phone calls to call. To call up the coalition, have them come in and give you education. But yes, we are all part of it. It's happening.
And I think one of the important things too, beyond the education and the awareness, is that there is support, whether it be, the Inner Truth Project in Port St. Lucie, or whether it be Catch the Wave of Hope. I mean, there are organizations that are committed to helping the vulnerable, to help those that are abused, to be able to say, you don't need to be stuck in this vicious cycle. Yes. You don't need, and don't blame yourself, that seek help. There is opportunity, there is support, because that's why we are here to not only shed light on this very challenging situation, but also to say that there is love, there is support, there are people who care immensely about trying to get back on the right path.
And I'm glad you mentioned Inner Truth Project and Catch the Wave of Hope. There's also Place of Hope. And all three have resources and classes and group sessions, and they focus on, and they have experts and therapists, and they can really help you. And those are the three places we do refer when we have the victims call, or anyone who wants to help, we refer them to one of those programs because they're all three wonderful programs.
Place of Hope is down in West Palm.
They are on the Treasure Coast as well, but they are on Palm Beach.
Palm Beach,
right?
Okay.
They are down there, and so if you're thinking of there, they are also up here.
Okay.
And they do. They have an office in Tradition, and I think I heard they're groundbreaking. I think for an office in and actually a facility in Vero coming up, I believe.
Yeah, so I think we're all in agreement here. Is that sometimes. People just think like, this is just so big. What do I do? And then you turn to hopelessness, and you're just like, gosh, we just live in such a broken world, and it is what it is.
But I also think that there's some times, especially in our own area, where we, like you said, we become complacent, we become, desensitized, or we even get to the notion of saying, well, this doesn't affect me. And I think we need to stop that mentality that it doesn't affect me. So therefore, if it doesn't affect me, I have no responsibility. And I think that we need to open our eyes from a biblical perspective, to see the ram that is caught in that thicket and understand that it does affect us, whether we are directly involved or indirectly, that it is in our own backyard, whether it be human sex trafficking, whether it be labor trafficking, when we know with the coalition of Immokalee workers in Immokalee, Florida, of the tomato growers, the tomato pickers, that it is here, it is not going away, and we need to address the issue and to create more sense of awareness and community base.
So that's an excellent. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to tell you, Florida is number 3.
Number 3.
Number 3 in human trafficking, and that was an excellent through line to moving on to now labor trafficking, because that is.
So just to go back a little bit, the 3 I would assume, and again I don't know, but I would assume that the 3 would be California would be top, Texas,
yes,
and then Florida.
Yes. Do you want to know 4 and 5?
Yes, please.
Ohio and New York.
Ohio.
Wow.
That's the one that threw me off too.
Yeah,
that's one that
it's not a real true port there.
But there is, because it's right there near Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Right.
That
was actually the one that threw me off. So the ports do matter because that affects our numbers because of the international trafficking aspect, but it does not doesn't change the fact that we have domestic trafficking. And every state, I went to a training a couple years ago where the guy flashed all 50 states, the whole United States on the board and said, which state doesn't have trafficking? And people were calling out, some in the Midwest, and he flashed up the little pinpoints.
Yeah.
And every state had at least one case. All 50 states.
Wow.
You have all 50 states that this touches.
So let's talk about the labor trafficking, and more specifically about just here at home. What does that look like?
The rabbi mentioned the farming. Farming is labor trafficking. You have domestic servitude, the nannies, the hotel workers that are brought over here and don't have their paperwork, can't get away. You might have heard probably about 18 months ago, there was an article where the labor trafficking was the selling the magazines. And I think it was out of Orlando. They were driving them on a bus or one of those van buses kind of thing, to Melbourne, and they were forcing them to sell magazines. During the day, the parents were unaware. Remember, we talked yesterday about how they drop them off at school and nobody knows that these children are missing school, and they come back, they bring them back, and all the trafficking was happening during the day, but it was magazines being sold.
So wait, so children were being pushed into a
door-to-door magazine sales.
Door-to-door magazine. They're not being compensated for this at all.
Correct.
They're being pulled out of school. And there must be some kind of psychological warfare going on there to make them think that this is okay, this is fine, not to report it to their principal or to their parents. And then they're spending the day just selling magazines.
That was the story. In Central Florida a couple years ago, but it is one of the labor trafficking aspects.
So this all comes in so many different forms.
It does.
Okay. And so and then when we look in the fields, not a lot of the migrant workers, that's legitimate business and that's going to people who are compensated and being cared for. But there are parts though too, where it is the modern day slavery. Absolutely.
They're brought over, they're brought to the farms, they're trafficked from, moved around from one farm to another. They're working off their debt because they have a debt when they were brought over. And you have to understand about the debt, they can never pay that off. Let's say it takes 5 years and they're being given, 5 cents of every $20 they're harvesting and maybe get close to paying off that debt. Then the debt is added to, because for the 5 years that they've provided you food and board, you then have to work off that debt. That's the whole thing, is you will never get out of that debt.
And there was a
papers.
There was a famous case. Maybe this was 5-6 years ago, of human labor trafficking in Immokalee, which is I guess halfway between where we are right now and Naples on the other side of the coast, and trafficking in terms of chaining, literally forcibly chaining. I think it was a couple of individuals into a U-Haul van, so that they would work and pick the fields the next day. And of course, we're talking Immokalee, which is, in the summer months and in the tomato season months. It gets oppressively hot. And in this U-Haul van that they almost literally boiled to death. And there was a little opening that they had literally crawled through and scraped through to rip the thing open on this U-Haul van, and escaped and went to the police. I believe it was the Naples police, to report that they had been human trafficked. And I think, stories like that, which, we read about, but are much more prevalent, that I think that we're not hearing. And I think in instances like that, how how are we to best equip ourselves when situations like that arise? I mean, it's not a one-off type of situation.
I think it's a good time to talk about what we were talking about, that, the violence behind human trafficking and the Hollywood sensationalization through movies, the movie Taken, which I don't know if either one of you have seen. I will absolutely admit I have not seen it. Okay. The horror that I hear the description, I haven't watched that movie. But the violence with the taking and the kidnapping, I think, is what everyone thinks about when they think of human trafficking. And that's not, it is one pathway. We call them pathways to recruitment. It is one pathway, but it's not the only one. You have parents selling children. You have seduction and coercion. You have false advertising for modeling, acting, or dancing opportunities. You have false advertising for educational opportunities. If you come over here, you have peer recruitment that we already talked about, and internet enticement through chat rooms or profile sharing sites. And that doesn't even talk about the whole video game aspect that was on the news a few weeks ago about traffickers or recruiters going into certain video game, I don't know what you call them.
Like video game chat rooms where you can be communicating with other players and stuff like that.
Well, and they were actually buying, what they were doing was garnering positive feelings by buying for the children.
Oh, wow.
The items.
Oh,
I guess
okay.
you buy.
Yes.
Buy
Fortnite,
weapons.
you can buy.
Yes, you can buy the skins and you can buy the weapons, and so they were just buying them. And whoever was responding, and you have to have a discussion with your children.
Yeah, have a discussion with children. Yeah,
strangers. I know it's attractive, but strangers can't be buying you weapons on your video game.
Yeah. Yep. We just got to, I want to bring on Brian, who's just called in to the show. Brian, welcome. And thank you for calling in to A Priest and a Rabbi. Good morning.
Good morning, Father Christian. How you doing?
It's good to have you, brother. What do you got for us?
Well, I was trying really hard to listen to your whole show, but I'm busy doing other things. And the human trafficking, as a father of 2 daughters, it's just a concept that I can't even fathom. And like my oldest daughter, she's at a point in her life right now where, I hate to say put yourself in a position of vulnerability, but, I just couldn't imagine if anything were to happen to either of my daughters, along those lines.
And as a parent, now knowing this awareness and knowing all what's been happening in the news, is there a different approach, or does it change the way you think about, even with your younger daughter or your older daughter, of conversations to have?
Yeah, it does, because, with my youngest daughter, whom she's very influential at 9 years old, and, we try to the best of my ability. I try to tell them, lead them in the right direction, but, kids are going to be kids. And, that topic that was just brought up about the video games, my sons, you got to police what they do, what they see and what they play and, everything like that. So they don't get caught up into that predatory situation,
Right. And I think there's some like as Roberta was saying, there's some telltale signs here that, so we don't have to, every parent doesn't have to go into a place of horrific fear. But that, if you're playing the video game and there's some other profile of a person who starts buying you a lot of different goods and stuff like that, and weapons and stuff while you're playing the video game, that might be a red flag. And come talk to me, come talk to daddy, that starts happening, things to be aware of, as opposed to having to have this conversation of saying, son, I don't want you to be trafficked. Of saying, son, if someone online starts buying you a bunch of things and while you're playing the game, just let me know, because that's not normal.
Yeah. And of course I talk about that with my boys. And the other thing, you got to worry about narcotics, getting, a child hooked on drugs, and then they become real vulnerable,
Absolutely. And it is a tactic of traffickers. I forgot to mention, but, using the drugs to have them reliant on you, the victim reliant on you. Absolutely.
Exactly. Exactly. Listen, I got to get back. I just wanted to call and say, hey, and, your show's incredible. I listen to it as much as I can, and it's a great show.
God bless you, brother. Thank you so much for calling in.
Okay, bye.
Yeah, so a lot of this is that, what we wanted to talk about today, really what we wanted to get at is just overall the awareness of that this is not just something that I think sometimes when we think of sexual trafficking or human trafficking, we do think of Liam Neeson being the Superman who comes in and flies to another kind of, Eastern Soviet bloc country to go save his daughter, right? And but but for us to take that and say, yeah, that is happening right in our backyard. And what can we all do as citizens? Because we all have to be a light shining in amongst this. We have to think locally of this global epidemic, but each one of us has to do our part, because this is such a huge monster that's there. But whether it's faith communities, civic communities, we all have to be a part of this. And I think, Rabbi, what I'm hearing from you is, and then from a faith perspective, we have a call, because we can't just sit idly by and know that this is happening. So, Roberta, we want to thank you so much for coming onto the show. And again, let's repeat those phone numbers. I know you said for the National Human Trafficking phone line was 888-3737-888.
Yes.
So if you have a tip or something, if there's something that's not looking right, to make that phone call. And then for Florida, for when you're dealing with children, that you think there might be something fishy going on, or one of your children come home from school and say, hey, I think my friend Melissa might be in a tight situation, 1-800-96-ABUSE.
And don't underestimate law enforcement, your local law enforcement. Absolutely. You can contact your local law enforcement, because they want to know as well.
And I think as we conclude, just one phrase that I think constantly rings through my ears as well, as I mentioned before, few are guilty, but all are responsible. We have a moral and ethical responsibility to help not only our children, but all citizens who are vulnerable and in need.
God bless you. What's one thing you can do today to help fight this?